The storm rolled in faster than I'd ever seen. 1 minute, the air was still, heavy with the scent of wet pine and the faint hiss of distant rain. The next, the sky cracked open and spat fury. I'd just finished pitching my tent along the northern shore of Lake Isabella, a quiet, pine-framed lake that usually sat like a mirror under the sun. That day, though, the wind came in off the water like a living thing, flattening grass, snapping branches, and tossing spray into the air. I was still congratulating myself for getting camp set up before the rain hit, when I heard the unmistakable sound of fabric ripping, a deep, wrenching tearing that made my stomach drop. My main tent pole had snapped right at the midpoint. For a second, I just stood there with the rain beginning to pelt my jacket, staring at that sad, folded mess of nylon and aluminium. Every camper knows the feeling, the flash of disbelief, followed by the immediate mental tally of what's still working. Sleeping bag? Dry. Stove? Check. Tent? Well, that's going to be a problem. The forecast had promised light rain, but it was now shaping into something far more serious. The horizon had gone dark, thunder rumbling like an approaching freight train. I scrambled to salvage what I could, pulling the collapsed tent into the lee of a large boulder to give myself at least a partial windbreak. The pole was sheared clean in two. Normally, I'd have a spare sleeve to splint it, but I'd used that on a friend's trip earlier in the summer and never replaced it. Of course, that's how it always goes. Disaster waits until the moment you're least prepared. I ran through my mental inventory. Duct tape, some paracord, a small hatchet, and a handful of tent stakes. Plenty of nearby saplings too. The rain was coming harder now, sheets of it, cold and stinging against my face. I huddled beneath my poncho and started thinking like a woodsman instead of a tourist. First step, find a replacement pole. I spotted a young birch about the thickness of my thumb, straight as an arrow, and cut it low near the base. Stripped the bark with my knife and tested the flex. It bent, but it didn't crack. Good enough. I lined it up beside the broken aluminium section, lashed it tight with paracord. Not long after, I zipped the tent shut. Rain lashed the fabric like handfuls of gravel, and every gust made the patched pole creak like an old ship's mast. The sound was unnerving, each moan a reminder that I was one bad gust away from sleeping in a puddle. I wedged my boots and pack against the windward wall to keep it from caving in, then crouched low, flashlight between my knees, studying the pole repair by its jittery beam. The birch branch bowed dangerously, but held its line. The paracord stretched tight as violin strings, humming faintly with the wind. Inside, condensation began dripping from the ceiling, tapping a nervous rhythm on my sleeping bag. The air smelled of wet nylon, pine resin, and that clean, electric scent that comes right before a bolt of lightning hits nearby. I'd camped through storms before, but this one had a mean edge to it. The kind that makes the forest feel alive and restless, like it's trying to shake you off. I thought of my dad, who used to say, "You never really own your campsite in a storm. You just borrow a corner of the wild and hope it lets you stay." At that moment, I understood exactly what he meant. After an hour or so, the worst of the wind eased, but the rain kept coming, steady, relentless, drumming on the tent roof like 1,000 fingers. My little cooking stove was useless. The wind had blown out the flame the instant I'd tried to light it earlier. Dinner would be cold rations and a soggy granola bar. I dug through my gear, hoping for inspiration. My lighter still worked, and I had a tin of instant soup mix. If I could make some kind of windbreak, maybe I could heat water using the last of my fuel canister. I pulled on my rain jacket, crawled out into the downpour, and found a fallen log nearby, half hollow, waterlogged, but deep enough to block some of the gusts. I set the stove inside, shielding the flame with my body while I coaxed it to life. The sputtering blue flame flickered, caught, and held. It felt like victory. I crouched there in the mud, rain trickling down my neck. Watching feels more like a truce than a sunrise. The rain had stopped, but fog hung low over the lake, drifting between the trees in pale ribbons. Everything dripped. The branches, the rocks, even the air seemed wet. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. My makeshift repair still stood, leaning a little but intact. The birch pole glistening under a thin coat of dew. I reached out and gave it a cautious tap. Solid. Against all odds, it had held. The ground outside was a soggy mess, pocked with puddles and littered with pine needles. My fire ring was half flooded, and the lake had crept higher up the shore, lapping at the edge of camp like it wanted to claim the rest. My gear was damp but not ruined, another small mercy. I brewed a cup of instant coffee, sitting cross-legged on a flat stone, letting the steam mingle with the morning mist. The first sip tasted like victory and mud. While I ate a cold breakfast of granola and jerky, I took stock of the day ahead. The plan had been to hike the ridge trail on the far side of the lake, but with the storm damage, that seemed foolish. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no insects. Just the steady dripping of water from the canopy. I decided instead to stay put and reinforce what I had. If the weather turned again, I wanted my shelter ready. I scavenged through the woods, looking for more straight saplings. A few birches, some young maples, all flexible and green. With my knife and paracord, I built a crude support frame, 2 cross braces lashed together, wedged against the weak side of the tent. It wasn't elegant, but it spread the load. While I worked, I kept hearing the faint crackle of branches falling somewhere deep in the forest. The storm had left the woods unstable, wounded. When I was done, I walked down to the lake. The water was cold, but I splashed my face anyway, trying to shake off the fatigue. A few loons called somewhere across the water, their voices echoing through the mist. For a moment, everything felt utterly still, like the world was holding its breath after the night's fury. I found a large piece of driftwood and started forest back to life. The first chirps of sparrows, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, the rustle of squirrels reclaiming their routines. Even the lake looked friendlier, its surface calm now, mirroring the softened sky. My spirits rose with the temperature. I took the chance to dry my gear, sleeping bag draped over a low branch, socks pinned to a stick, tent flaps open wide to catch the sun. That's when I noticed the damage beyond camp. Branches littered the trail leading up the ridge, some as thick as my wrist. The storm had torn through like an angry god. I'd have to navigate carefully if I wanted to leave the next day. For now, though, it was time to rest and to make something warm. My stove was still acting up, sputtering more than it should, the valve hissing unevenly. The metal casing had taken a knock in the chaos of the night, maybe from one of those flying rocks the wind had hurled at the tent. When I tried to light it, the flame flared, coughed, and died. I sat back, rubbing my chin, watching a thin thread of fuel hiss out uselessly. A broken pole was one thing, but losing the stove meant no hot meals, no coffee, no sterilized water. That could be serious if the stormwater had contaminated the lake. I tried cleaning the jet with a pin, tightening the valve, coaxing it back to life. Nothing. That's when I remembered an old trick I'd seen from a friend on a canoe trip years ago. He'd made a simple alcohol burner using nothing more than a metal can and a bit of cotton. I didn't have alcohol, but I had white gas for the stove, and I could improvise a similar setup. I took my empty soup can, poked small holes around the rim with my knife, and filled the bottom with a shallow pool of fuel. With a strip of cotton torn from my spare sock, I fashioned a crude wick. When I struck my lighter, the flame took instantly, a clean blue ring dancing steady and quiet. I grinned. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. I boiled a pot of lake water, added a pinch of instant coffee, and sat there sipping it as the light grew gold around me. Sometimes, ingenuity isn't about brilliance. It's about sap. And somewhere across the lake, a single frog croaked, low and steady, like a heartbeat. I lay back in my sleeping bag, the repaired tent arching above me, a faint silhouette of birch and cord against the starlit sky. I could hear the occasional drip from the trees, but the violent hiss of rain and wind had been replaced by peace, fragile, precious peace. Sleep came easily for the first time in 2 days. When I woke near dawn, the world outside was washed in silver fog again, soft enough to blur the shoreline. I brewed another round of coffee on my little tin can stove, proud that it had survived the night without melting through. The flame wavered in the mist, barely visible, and the coffee's aroma mixed with the smell of damp leaves. I sat on a log and watched the fog peel away from the water, revealing smooth ripples spreading toward the far shore. I thought about heading home early, but something in me wanted to stay one more night. There was no rush now, just a sense of calm that comes after the storm teaches you its lesson. The tent pole, now scarred and stained with duct tape and smoke, stood like a badge of survival. I'd learned to trust my hands again, to think rather than panic. It's strange how confidence can return, not from success, but from necessity. You stop wondering if you can handle it, and just do. Later, I walked along the lakeshore, collecting the debris the storm had left behind. Branches, feathers, scraps of bark. Little reminders of chaos now stilled. I found a small bird's nest dislodged from a pine, still intact, woven tight with grass and spider silk. I set it gently in a crook of another tree, hoping some future brood might make use of it. The forest always rebuilds. It just doesn't complain about the work. By mid-morning, I packed up camp. Every knot I'd tied, every splint I'd fashioned, I took apart slowly, studying them like old friends. The birch pole I left leaning against a stump, a token for the next traveller who might need it. As I loaded my pack, sunlight broke through again, scattering across